A great many things come into play when I'm trying to decide what we're going to do in here, and I can tell you, I agonize over this every time we do a topic change. You know that. Sometimes I'll throw it out, crowdsource you for suggestions, but I thought this was a nice. I think we needed to study the Old Testament more. I don't think and I say that a lot. So I know you've heard it before. I don't think we studied the Hebrew Bible enough. So I considered a number of Old Testament books, and I ran these by Deb, and I said, Deb, what do you think about, a book of the Old Testament? She said, well, I don't know, I don't think Leviticus is a good idea. And she said, Numbers is certainly not a good idea with all the names and the numbers. And then, what's that? It can kind of be thick, yeah. Genesis and Exodus are very interesting books, I think, but we're studying Genesis in our ladies' Bible class, our Tuesday ladies' class. So I didn't want to do that. And then we have, I don't know that we've studied Exodus recently, but I know on Sunday morning about a year ago, we did a series on the Kings and the Chronicles. So I thought, well, and then we're doing Matthew on Sunday morning. Jared's doing Joshua on Sunday morning. I thought, well, we're covering it. No, he's teaching a class on Joshua. So anyway, I said, well, Job, and then Job came up in my daily readings. Just coincidentally, no. Providentially, yes. And I realized this is what we need. This would be a study well worth our time. And I'm almost finished reading the book, but I started about 5 days ago. And it's a great. It's really good. I have been using the NIV and the new NIV, and I'm very impressed with the way they translate it in a way I can understand it. I'm very impressed with that. What my goal is that you'll come away with a greater understanding of providence. You'll come away with a greater understanding of the purposes for suffering. And much of the time, we have no idea why we suffer. We have no idea. We are left to speculate and wonder. Job was never told, spoiler alert, he never found out why he suffered. He never did. He cried out for an answer, and he never did. And as I have jokingly said in the past, if the Lord had tried to explain it to him, Job would have said, no, write a book about somebody else. I'm not interested in you writing a book about suffering and me being the subject. Thank you very much. So anyway, so that's where we're at. That's why we're on Job, and we'll do it for the next few weeks. What's the plot? What's the plot in Job, as best you can remember it? I'm crowdsourcing for information here. Just what do you know about Job? What's the plot line?
Well, God and the devil are just kind of debating about whether or not Job is going to stay good to him. Stay good because God has had him hedged in. He's been so good to Job because Job was such a good man.
No, Satan said that God hadn't hedged him. Doesn't mean he had.
Yeah, I know it. But they did. Because he was such a good man, he was rewarded likewise.
Okay.
And so the devil used that as an excuse for testing him.
Okay. You've heard the prayer, Lord, put a hedge of protection around somebody, Well, that's from Job. The idea of a hedge of protection. That's from Job. But actually, those are Satan's words.
I know
They're his words. We'll go into that more next week. But that's, yeah.
Other things said in the Bible that is not necessarily true because it depends on who's saying it.
That's exactly right. And does the Lord put up a hedge of protection? Well, he does to an extent, but we'll talk about that some more.
He probably did around Paul.
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, what happened after that? Okay, so
And then his friends come to see him, and they
And with
are not
things
very
like
friendly.
this, you know,
No.
They want to claim that it's all his fault.
Okay.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, it's all your fault.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that was just the prevailing thought of the time.
Oh, is that still of that time, or is that still the case today?
Well, I do think sometimes it is punishment.
Mm-hmm.
He'll tell you there when he's talking about the wind and who directs the wind and everything, and the storms, God says that he does it, he himself does it. God
Okay.
invents tornadoes, et cetera, but he tells you why, that there's a lot of different reasons. It's not always just one
Well,
reason.
leprosy was a sign of divine judgment. So the common view of the first century Jew was during Jesus' day that you had leprosy because you were a sinner. Because Miriam got it, King Uzziah got it, because they were horribly disobedient.
And it was punishment. It
Right.
definitely was
Right.
punishment.
Right. So every leper became a sinner back in the day. That's why Jesus healing lepers and touching them was such an incredibly revolutionary thing. Okay. So the 3 friends, the 4 friends, 3 friends, and then 1 friend comes along. They basically, there's nuances of thought there, okay? There's some nuances of thought that we're going to look at amongst those 4 fellas that come. And then what happens, what is Job doing during all this? As they're telling him,
He's suffering.
well, he's suffering. Yeah, he's got horrible suffering. So what does he say? I mean, do you remember some of the things?
Well, he's just bewildered. He can't understand what's going on.
Okay.
Well, he cursed the day of his birth.
He did. He did.
But he never cursed God.
No, he never cursed God.
Judge those friends too much, but think how good friends they were. They did come and stay with him for 3 days, wasn't it?
7 days.
Or 7 days? Okay,
They stayed with him a whole week and didn't say anything.
Night and day they were with him, so you know they loved him.
Mm-hmm.
But they just had the idea that he was being punished, and they wanted him to admit it, so God would quit punishing him.
Do you remember what he called them, though, at the end? Miserable comforters.
Yeah, right.
Miserable comforters. They became miserable because they kept trying to give him an answer to his suffering.
Yeah,
And there was no answer. There was none.
Well, their answer was that it was all his fault.
Yes. Yeah. It's sin in your life somewhere. Yeah. Now Job was defensive. And not in a bad way, I don't think. He was just said, I haven't done anything. I know my own heart. I haven't done anything wrong.
I think they just wanted him to admit it, so he could
Right.
well.
Right.
God would let him,
Okay. And then what happens after Job makes his defense and demands that God give him an answer? God talks to him,
and he sees
but he doesn't give him an answer. No. And then the last thing happens, the last chapter, what happens to Job?
Better than off than he was.
Yes. Better off than he was before.
But you know, I kind of wonder about that too, because he took a bunch of his kids and.
Yes, he
they're
did.
like snowflakes, they may all look alike in a way, but they're all different. They're unique. How can you replace a child?
He had 3 daughters and 7 sons. They were all married, and he lost all of them. You could say, well, he was better off at the end than he was at the beginning. Really?
Yeah, that's how I have a little.
He had buried 10 children and their husbands and wives. Is that better? I don't think it's that simple a solution.
He had more physical things.
Overall, what's Job about? Suffering. Yes. It's basically about suffering and the reasons for it, or lack of reasons. What literary form is Job? Poetry. It's Hebrew poetry. It doesn't rhyme in the Hebrew. It's a different form of poetry. It uses lots of picturesque language, okay? I don't think there's even any rhythm to it. As I understand it, again, I don't know Hebrew, okay? I don't even pretend to know Hebrew. But the guys that do know Hebrew and gals that write about this say it's really more about analogies and word pictures and things like that. It's very, very provocative, picturesque language that is being used. And that fills the bill for poetry.
It's just really a live story, isn't it?
Yes. What is the biggest obstacle to understanding Job? What do you think is? Certainly you have gone and read the first 3 chapters, which everybody knows the first 3 chapters, and maybe the last 2. But the middle 30-plus chapters are seldom studied. And we're going to study them here because they're interesting. They're very interesting, but we're going to stop long enough. I remember if you go on a nature hike, unless you're interested, You don't want to see the little wildflowers. They don't bother you. They're not interested in you. But I can tell you, Job is very interesting in ways that I didn't realize. There's a lot there. But what's the big obstacle is it's long, I think. It's long. It's a very, very long. It's epic. I mean, it's epic poetry. It's long form poetry. And it never gives you well, we know why.
But you
The reader knows.
do kind of want
In a sense, right. In a sense, the reader knows.
We really don't
Right.
know why
why on earth
they ever
would
started in
Lord
the first place.
the devil have his way there?
Great question, and believe me, we're going to try to address that. That'll probably be in our next week class. What in the world was going on? And we're going to look at Satan a little. It's going to be difficult. Well, let me tell you something about Job that probably will not surprise you. We restudy books of the Bible because it seems that we learn something new or we're reminded of something we need to know every time that we go back to it, because we are different when we read it at different times in our lives. As I prepared this overview tonight, I read several biblical scholars who have spent their lives studying the book of Job and found that they were very open about stating that every time they read Job, they see something new. That impressed me. Some of the guy who wrote the Word Bible commentary, which is an extensive scholarly treatment of the Old Testament and of the book of Job, this guy did this. This one author did 3 volumes, books that thick on Job. 3 volumes. So the whole thing would be like that much commentary on Job. And he wrote in his introduction that he sees something new every single time he reads the book. I was impressed with that. I can tell you, I've never read any commentator, a scholar, write like, I don't know everything about this book. You know,
It's the Holy Spirit revealing.
it is. And there's so much. In 40 plus chapters, you're going to see a bunch of stuff. There's a lot of different things in there. So we see new things in it. We have different experiences that we bring to the text. If you're going through suffering, Job becomes very real to you. You know, there's armchair students of Job. You know, you are sitting in a room in your office and you're contemplating, you know, what's going on in the storyline. And then you've got the wheelchair students of Job. They're suffering. So you have 2 different kinds of people that are looking at this story. And so wherever you are in your life, I don't think some people are in wheelchairs all the time because they're suffering all the time. I mean, it happens. But then there are some, and I've had some, I'm not presently a wheelchair student, but I have been. So, you know, whether you're studying in the privacy of your home, thinking about what it might mean to someone else in their time of suffering, and you want to help them, or whether you're actually going through suffering yourself, you've got armchair students of Job and you've got wheelchair students of Job too. So when I visit people who are sick or dying, these folks often wonder aloud the same things that Job wondered. I can tell you, as a chaplain, I used the book of Job more often than any other single biblical book in my biblical counseling with people. It absolutely was the most valuable weapon in my arsenal to comfort. It may not always comfort, but it could kind of blunt some of the pain, because it's not uncommon to not have answers. It's not uncommon. It's not a sin to not know why you're suffering. It's not a sin not to know. Job didn't know. He never did find out. But it is not wrong to cry out to God for relief, to wonder why you're still alive, why you suffer. And I got to tell you, Job just got downright hostile sometimes with God, the Almighty. He was downright hostile. I can tell people when they say, I think I've sinned because I really got mad at God. I said, boy, well, let me point this out to you here. What Job had some things to say, and I could call those passages up, and I'd say, you know, God can handle our complaints.
Because he understands why.
Yeah. And he's God. He sees us and he knows us. He knows when we're blaspheming, and he knows when we're questioning, when we're angry or disillusioned about the way life has turned out. And Job gives us a reason to say we don't have to know why we're suffering. It's okay. Or we will never know. You know, we say this a lot. We'll say things like, well, you know, one day we'll know. Maybe not. Are you okay with God knowing and you not knowing
You may not
something?
You may not be now, but you will be when you get to heaven, because God's presence is so wonderful that it absolutely wipes out everything else.
Yeah. I know that he will wipe away our tears. Will he explain everything to us? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. It's possible that we won't. Possible. We will know as we have been known, 1 Corinthians 13. Beyond that, I don't know. And we restudy Job because we have new troubles in our lives all the time. We're not in the same circumstance we were 5 to 10 years ago. We're not the same person. We're not in the same circumstance. And that is true of any scripture you read. It seems especially true of Job, especially if you're going into a season of life that's very difficult. And if you're going into later years, it's difficult. I know you know. Okay? I want to share with you some stuff here from a guy named Harold Kushner. Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote the book When Bad Things Happen to Good People, and this is one retitled. He retitled it When Bad Things Happen to a Good Person. He wrote this book, the book of Job. His book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, is based on the book of Job. I will tell you that his arguments, I think, were wrong, and I'll tell you what they are in a moment. But he shared something very courageously that not many up until this time had ever done. He dealt head on with the issue of suffering, and he used Job as his tool. I can tell you a little bit about his background. He and his wife had a son named Aaron, who was diagnosed with progeria at the age of 3. He had had progeria from the time he was 9 months old, but he went for over 2 years. Now, this is the late 70s when they really didn't know what progeria was. They were still trying to figure out what it was. It is rapid aging.
Accelerated old age.
Yep. And generally,
I've seen it. I felt
children who have progeria live to be teenagers, and that's about it. That's about as far as they can go. They die of old age. They noticed their child, Aaron, was not growing any hair at 9 months, and they became very concerned about that, and he was very frail and not gaining any weight. And the doctors looked at him for a couple of years, and finally they found a doctor who diagnosed him with progeria. It's extremely rare, and it was really something that wasn't well known in 1980. Things have happened since then, so we know what it's like. He was a young Jewish rabbi. He is not a believer in Christ. I'll just tell you, he's not. He is a Jewish rabbi, but I think he brings a unique view because he is steeped in the Hebrew Bible as a rabbi. So he studied the book of Job as it applies to him. And as an observant, devout Jew, he wondered aloud in his book why God was causing him and his boy and his wife to suffer like this. Allow this to happen to, he saw less righteous people living fulfilled lives with big houses full of healthy children. He didn't understand it. He just didn't get it. He wrote this in his book. He said, like most people, I was aware of the human tragedies that darken the landscape. The young people who died in car crashes, the cheerful, loving people wasted by crippling diseases, the neighbors and relatives whose retarded or mentally ill children people spoke of in hushed tones. But that awareness never drove me to wonder about God's justice or to question his fairness. I assumed that he knew more about the world than I did. And then came that day in the hospital when the doctor told us about Aaron and explained what progeria meant. It contradicted everything I have been taught. I could only repeat over and over in my mind, this can't be happening. It's not how the world is supposed to work. Tragedies like this were supposed to happen to selfish, dishonest people whom I, as a rabbi, would then try to comfort by reassuring them of God's forgiving love. How could it be happening to me, my son, if what I believed about the world was true? The book was published in 1981, 43 years ago, 4 years after Aaron died in 1977 at the age of 14 years. It took him 4 years to put it to paper and get it published. It's been in numerous printings, and it's still it's in paperback and very, very able to be obtained. Here was his reasoning in the book, okay? He could not reconcile the idea of an all-powerful God who is just and square that with innocents who suffer. He could not square that. So this led him to conclude, and he expresses it very openly in the book. I think it gives you a little insight into the Jewish mindset too, that God is not all-powerful. That was his conclusion, and that God cannot prevent all evil and tragedy, but is a loving, compassionate God who provides support and meaning through our suffering. That's Kushner's view. Of course, that view contrasts with the traditional view, which is God's in control of everything, absolutely everything. You get sick with a cold, God made that happen or allowed it to happen. Kushner argued against that perspective. His solution was to say that God has limited power but still good and loving. He can provide comfort and guidance, but he can't always rescue you. Okay? In summary, Kushner's central thesis is that God is not all-powerful, but he's a loving, empathetic presence. He helps people cope with tragedy and loss, but he's a God who is really almost helpless. His hands are tied in the cases of people like his son, Aaron.
He's dead wrong. God, he is all powerful, but he is limited. He limits himself.
Well, how would you, okay, so your reply, you jumped ahead to my next slide. How would you reply?
He limits himself, you know,
Okay,
because this is a sin-cursed planet. And when God put that curse on us, he limited himself by putting the curse on us.
okay. Anybody else have anything to say to Rabbi Kushner, if you had a chance? Doesn't have to be a biblical answer. What do you think? Maybe it's just from your heart. What would you say?
God allows lots of things to happen that he doesn't agree with, but that doesn't mean he couldn't control it.
Right,
If he
okay,
wanted to,
okay.
but it would make no sense for him to control every instance, every blast of the wind, every earthquake. That makes no sense.
Okay. Why would it make no sense for God to be in control of absolutely everything?
Then we would have no free will.
You'd have no free will. That's exactly right. You'd have no free will. And that's the biggest, that to me is that is the fatal flaw in John Calvin's theology of predestination. It eliminates free will entirely. Yeah. So, is God all powerful? Yeah, it's numerous places in Scripture. It is extolled, his power and his omnipotence are extolled in the Psalms and other places as well. If God is all-powerful, the question is, well, then how does God exercise his power?
By limiting himself in a lot of cases.
He has limited himself in some ways, yes. Yes.
When he puts that curse on us, he has to honor that curse. And that curse
Okay.
is what brings all these bad things on us.
Okay. Are there some things that God has chosen not to control?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. People.
But he can control. it if he
People.
wanted to.
Yeah. People. You know, that may have something to do with people being made in the image of God, is that we have the ability to make our own choices, just as he does, just as God has the ability to make his own choices.
And do you ever wonder how on earth he answers all the prayers when the people are praying for things that are contradicting each other?
He has no problem, because he,
That would spin your
well,
brain around.
now you're delving into things that I don't know about. How does God answer prayer?
Your neighbor might pray for something.
All I
and
can-
you might pray for something.
Jesus made it simple. He said, if you ask, it'll be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. But we know that that always comes with some conditions. It's not just a blank check. We may ask, but we may not get what we ask for. We may get something else. We may seek for something and find something else that's better. We may knock and he may delay in opening the door.
And that's why God says
So,
you have to trust him.
you can't take God's choice away from him any more than God. This is really something we need to think about. If we're made in the image of God and God makes choices, that means he has given us the dignity of making our own choices. That God has, Jesus said, I stand at the door and knock. He said, I don't stand at the door with a battering ram. I stand at the door and knock. So he honors, since we are made in his image and his likeness, he honors our right to make choices. Now, if we make bad choices, there are consequences. And God has warned us about that. But as far as health things that happen, in the case of Job, it was circumstances, and then finally his health broke. He developed these terrible boils, and he was utterly miserable, and God let it happen. So, and only we who read the story know why, and even then, it seems a bit unsatisfying, doesn't it, Randall? You don't really know why. Yeah, you really don't know why. So that's an all-powerful God who has chosen to limit himself, because he honors us as we are made in his image, to make choices of our own. He made the angels, but apparently he made the angels with free will too.
Yes, and he considers them sons, but they're created sons. He only has one begotten.
Well, that's right. So we answer Rabbi Kushner by saying, well, you're close, but you missed it. He is all-powerful, but he has chosen not to manage everything the way we would like to see it managed.
He doesn't micromanage.
No, and he is unless he wishes to, it's his choice. If he wants to micromanage, that's God's business. And I'm pretty sure at the end of time, he's micromanaging that. When the end of time comes, he's already said, I got things I'm going to do. He's promised us certain things that are going to happen. He's going to take things over at that point. So who wrote the book of Job and all of that, and when was it written? And it might not seem significant to you, maybe more interesting to Bible students or Bible teachers like myself. I will say this, that Job itself is considered by many to be one of the greatest pieces of literature written by anybody at any time. Not just in the Bible. I'm talking about any time, put it up against any great literature. They say Job's story is truly one of the epic stories ever told. And like most epic stories, it has to be long and complicated in some places, but we'll try to unravel it. Yeah. And who wrote it? My goodness, who knows? I'll tell you some things that I heard. I'll say that Jewish rabbis debated this a lot. Okay. Some said Moses, some said Solomon. Since Solomon wrote most of the poetry in the Bible, he wrote Proverbs. Well, and David wrote a lot of poetry, but it's not thought that David wrote Job. I didn't see his name come up. But I did see Moses and Solomon, and I saw Elihu. who is one of the characters in the story, as having been one of those that wrote it. The reason being, Elihu's arrival into the story comes like after all this other stuff has happened. Then Elihu shows up with his viewpoint. But Elihu doesn't really contribute a lot to the discussion, to tell you the truth. He nuances the argument a little bit, but not much. It's still pretty much the same thing. Job, you're doing wrong. God's always just. He's not treating you unjustly. And it's thought there's a passage in there that sounds like Elihu wrote it after the fact, that he actually wrote it in a way that said, I did this, that he was writing in the first person. So anyway, did Elihu write it? I don't know. That's debatable. When was it written? I've heard anything from the 1400s BC to about 500s BC. That's almost 1,000 years difference. And I think you could make cases for both. It may be. I tend to go with that. I think it is the oldest of the Old Testament books. I will just say, I'll just step out on a limb here and say that for many, many years it was thought that this was the oldest book. The reason I say that is because, one reason is because the land of Nod, which was where Job is from, Uz rather, the land of Uz, is thought to be maybe in the neighborhood of Babylon, maybe Ur of the Chaldees, close to Ur and Uz and all those two-letter cities. But it was possible that it was written before even Abraham's day. But I think the most compelling reason is one that I don't know firsthand, but again, read from several different sources. It's some of the oldest, it's like archaic Hebrew. Example. I'll give you an example. It's like reading the oldest King James Version Bible you could find in English. You would immediately know it's old. You'd say, well, they're theeing and thouing and thouest and hast and, kind of the way we used to pray in the 60s. All right, our public prayers, thou hast done this and forgiveth thy sins. And, we'd speak in Elizabethan English. And I remember being told, well, that's showing respect to God. Well, if you want to speak in 1611 English, I guess if you think that's respectful, that's okay. Interestingly, the King James scholars looked at it as that was the common speech of their day. It's not the common speech of our day. And it's hard to understand. This Hebrew that's written in Job is like King James Version Hebrew. It's old Hebrew. There's a lot of old, archaic sayings that are in, statements that are in Job, using very unusual words that are not used in the Old Testament very much. It's just loaded with lots of those kinds of words in it. So it's old, unique words are used, kind of like the King James Version in English. This is the King James Version of the Hebrew. Okay, so that's the best analogy I can give you there as far as that goes. So I'm going with the older dating. I think it was probably written pre-Abraham, post-Noah, pre-Abraham, somewhere in there. Okay, so it's an old one, but the thing that's important is that when it was inspired, there are things that only an inspired writer could have written. There are things in there that only someone who knew what was going on in heaven could have written about. Because the first chapter is, the curtain's lifted back from heaven. You're in the heavenly councils. So somebody who was inspired wrote this book. So let's look at the storyline one more time. Job is a righteous, prosperous man. And his prosperity and his righteousness are connected. That is part of the storyline, is that he is a prosperous man because he is a righteous man. Satan accuses Job of being God's favorite, basically. Say, well, you protect him. You give him everything he wants and needs to abundance, and that's why he serves you. If you took it from him, he'd curse you to your face. Well, Job's livelihood, God allowed Satan to take away his livelihood and his family. Job does not curse God. Okay? The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Wow. I mean, that's That's incredible. But that's not where Job stays. Okay, Job's attitude moves in a darker direction. Satan accuses Job again. It says, just let me touch his person. God says, well, don't kill him, but you can touch him. Job still won't curse God, but he is now officially miserable. He's lost his family. His wife has suggested that he curse God, blaspheme God, and commit suicide, basically. Curse God and die. You'd be better off. This is what you get for serving a God like this. Okay, so he's totally miserable on every level. 3 friends come to comfort him, and after a week, they begin to accuse him of sin. All right? And Job defends himself. His friends continue to accuse him of wrongdoing. 3 rounds with Job. He fends them off once, he tells them a second time, and a third time he tells them, I'm not guilty of what you're accusing me of. But they said to him consistently, basically, you're suffering because of your sin. That's why this is happening. And Job refuses to accept that. And he articulates his feelings toward them. He tells them off. But he also tells off God and laments his very life. As Becky said, he said, I just cursed them my birth, wished I'd never been born. Then Elihu joins the conversation to put icing on the cake, basically accuses Job of the same problems that they had accused of, these 3 other guys had accused him of, and then Job confronts God and he wants answers. Well, God Almighty answers Job. Doesn't give him the answers he wants, but he answers him. Job repents. One thing I didn't put in the storyline is that God then told Job, you need to pray for your friends because they stink. As friends, they stink. You need to pray, intercede for them because they are terrible. He'd already called them miserable comforters. I don't think they needed to be told that again. And then God restores Job after all that time. So why does nobody deserves to suffer. Nobody deserves to suffer. Sometimes we just don't know what causes it.
How many of us could actually say, we've never done any sin that we could cause?
Yeah. One of the things I'm going to continually bring up, Job's defending himself almost sounds self-righteous at times. You'll see this as we go through the book. It sounds really self-righteous. I mean, who can say I've not sinned? And Job to go on like that. Yeah.
And also we got to realize here that God is actually speaking to these men. Because that was back in the days of the patriarch when God
Apparently so.
directly with people. So they're actually hearing from him, maybe even seeing visions.
My guess is the angel, that's just my guess, would be the angel of the Lord appeared to Job, and that was enough. That was enough, because it got Job's attention immediately. And then that answer is just of things of scientific facts, some of them scientific facts for which they would have had no knowledge base at all at the time. None.
So it came down straight from him.
It had to. Had to. I would say it's one of the true evidences of the Scripture's validity.
Yes.
It's a scriptural evidence within the text itself.
I just wish that
So-
I had read this book when I was still married to my husband before all this bad stuff happened.
Because you went through
He was an agnostic, and he really did want to believe. He just couldn't do it.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
but he was really interested in science. If I had read that and realized that I could point, Isaiah 40:22 tells you the world is round, and Job 26:7 tells you it's suspended in
Stinks
space.
of nothing.
These
Yeah.
primitive men have known that.
They would not have known that. They would not have known that. They couldn't have known it. Yes. Yep. Yep. That's all I've got tonight for the overview. Any questions? Anything you want to cover? Anything that you want to cover in this study? Anything in particular in the past that you've studied or that you'd like to have covered in this study? I tell you what, as we go through, as you do, feel free to interrupt me and ask your questions, please, okay?
For interrupting. I have a short memory these days because of my age. If I don't say what I think of, when I think of it, I'll forget it.
Okay, okay. All right, I'm with you, girl. I am with you. I am so with you.